Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. And our big focus on the show continues to be on the US election. Election day in the US is now just 24 hours away. The question on everyone's mind is this: will America deliver a clear and decisive verdict this time? Or will we see delays in vote counting, confusion, chaos, conspiracy theories, lawsuits in various courts, and political and social instability of the kind we witnessed in 2020, or perhaps worse? Most pollsters have predicted that it will be a very tight election where it could take days, if not weeks, for a winner to be declared. And in the end, the victory margin could be wafer thin. Of course, polls can go wrong. But one thing that's unmistakable is this: the 2024 presidential election is one of the most consequential elections in American history, and the stakes for the American people and indeed the world couldn't be higher. Pundits say it's not the popular vote, but the electoral college votes that will determine the winner. And in the end, it all comes down to the 7 key battleground states. These are the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin, and the Sunbelt states of Nevada, North Carolina, Arizona and Georgia. So far, most polls had given a marginal edge to Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris while predicting a neck-and-neck race. Now, one particular poll has claimed that Republican candidate Donald Trump is leading in all the 7 swing states. According to the latest Atlas Intel poll, 49% of the respondents said they would vote for Trump, and the Republicans hold a 1.8% vote lead over Harris. The survey conducted on the first 2 days of November included about 2,500 likely voters in the US, the majority of them female. Another survey of swing states has revealed that the Republican nominee is favored to win in all the swing states. In Arizona, Trump holds his widest margin with 51.9% to 45.1% lead over Harris. In Nevada, 51.4% of the voters chose Trump, while 45.9% chose Harris. In North Carolina, Trump leads by 50.4% of votes, while Harris gets 46.8% of the vote share. This is according to one particular poll, and as we said, polls can go wrong. In the US, presidential elections are shaped by 3 categories of states: the red states, the blue states and the swing states. Red states are those where Republicans have consistently won since 1980, while blue states are where Democrats have dominated since 1992. These states are generally considered predictable in terms of their electoral outcomes, barring a few exceptions. It is the swing states where the battle between Republicans and Democrats is often extremely close, with winners ending up with razor-thin margins. For instance, in the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden won Arizona by just 10,000 votes. A Reuters Ipsos poll published last week on the 29th of October showed Kamala Harris leading over Donald Trump, with the Democrat ahead by just a single percentage point over the Republican, 44% to 43%. But fact is, Harris's lead over Trump has steadily shrunk since late September, after the initial boost she received amid the euphoria over the vice president replacing President Biden on the Democratic ticket. At the moment, it is anybody's election, if polls are to be believed. And that is triggering immense anxiety and nervousness, not just in the 2 rival camps, but in fact among Americans throughout the country. More than 75 million voters in the US have already cast their ballots. They're now facing an election that could profoundly change the country and the world, and that has people on both sides fearing for their way of life should their candidate lose. And the public utterances of Donald Trump are doing nothing to ease the discomfort of the voters. Some analysts say the former president is darkening what is already the most dystopian closing argument in modern American history. Just like he did in 2020, Trump is already laying the groundwork to create doubts about the integrity of the election by hurling allegations that Democrats are cheating without offering any proof to back his claims. While Vice President Kamala Harris has repeatedly warned about the perils of a second Trump term, she has also sought to invoke optimism about the future of the country as she lays claim to a new generation of leadership in America. Contrast this with what Donald Trump told his supporters on Sunday. While addressing a rally in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, Trump said he regrets leaving the White House in 2021. Why? Because he claims, till date, that the Democrats stole the election from him and that it was he who had won in 2020 and not Joe Biden. Never mind the fact that every single inquiry and court that this matter went to dismissed Trump's claims as baseless, and there is a pending case against Trump for trying to overturn the 2020 election through fraudulent means and outright lies and undermining the US Constitution by preventing the smooth and peaceful transfer of power. But facts don't really seem to matter much to Donald Trump or his hardcore supporters, who continue to propagate their false propaganda even 4 years later. At this particular rally in the must-win battleground state of Pennsylvania on Sunday, the former president told his supporters that Democrats are fighting so hard to steal this damn thing and that voting machines would be tampered with. He also said he should not have left the White House in 2021 after losing the 2020 election. He described Democrats as demonic, complained about a new poll that shows him no longer leading in Iowa, a state that he twice carried, and said he would not mind if a gunman aiming at him also shot through the fake news. Trump spent much of his speech pushing unfounded claims of cheating by Democrats in the 2024 election and sowing doubts about its integrity, as polls show him and Vice President Kamala Harris deadlocked nationally. He ranted about alleged election interference this year and lamented his departure from office after losing to Joe Biden 4 years ago. It was a rare public admission of regret over participating in the transfer of power after he had incited his supporters to violently storm the US Capitol on 6 January 2021 as he tried to subvert the results of the 2020 election that he had lost, but refused to concede, something that Trump is currently facing federal charges over, as we just mentioned. The Iowa poll that shows Harris taking the lead has left Trump fuming. According to reports, Trump told his campaign that the poll should never have been released. Trump's advisors then tried to assure him that the survey was not accurate. Trump stirred yet another controversy when he said, "To get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news, and I don't mind that so much." A Trump campaign spokesperson later said that the former president was actually musing about how the press was protecting him. Analysts say the former president's newest round of threats cap off a campaign with one of the darkest, most menacing closing messages in modern American history. In the last few weeks alone, Trump has doubled down on a pledge to use the military to combat the civilian enemy within, and mused about how former Representative Liz Cheney, one of his loudest conservative Republican critics, would fare with guns trained on her face in a war zone. And that's not all. Trump's dog whistles have only got worse, and his political rhetoric and personal attacks have been absolutely crass, distasteful, and appalling. On Saturday night in North Carolina, Trump chuckled approvingly at an audience member's suggestion that Vice President Harris worked as a sex worker at the start of her career. One of his supporters shouted, "She worked on a corner." Trump laughed, paused, then declared, "This place is amazing." As the crowd laughed, he added, "Just remember, it's other people saying it, it's not me." Trump's response to the crude remark about his political opponent underscores how the rotten American political discourse went into overdrive after Trump's arrival on the presidential campaign trail back in 2015. Recent polls have shown the former president trailing Harris with female voters by a significant margin across demographic lines. What has been the response of the Trump campaign? Well, they're urging more men to vote. Remember, Trump has also vowed revenge on his opponents and critics. Kamala Harris recently told his supporters in Washington, D.C., and I quote, "On day one, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list full of priorities on what I will get done for the American people." Today is the last day of campaigning. Trump is busy wooing voters in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, which could end up deciding who wins this election, and finally Michigan, all swing states. Harris, who held a final Michigan rally on Sunday, is spending Monday in Pennsylvania, including a big finish in Philadelphia with Lady Gaga and Oprah Winfrey. If Trump wins the Tuesday election, he will be only the second president in US history to win a non-consecutive term. He will complete one of the most staggering political comebacks ever after trying to torch democracy to stay in power after the 2020 election, being convicted of a crime and escaping 2 attempts on his life this year. Harris, on the other hand, could shatter the line of nearly 250 years of male commanders-in-chief and become the first female president of the United States of America. It would be a stunning feat after she unified the demoralized Democratic Party in July when President Biden's re-election bid was destroyed by the ravages of age. Americans are about to make their choice now. Is it going to be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
As the U.S. presidential candidates draw their campaigns to a close, Democrat Kamala Harris and her Republican opponent Donald Trump struck contrasting tones on Sunday. While Harris made her closing pitch to undecided voters in Michigan, Trump leaned into violent rhetoric and seemed more focused on revving up his base. In Pennsylvania, where Trump survived an assassination attempt in July, the former president on Sunday frequently abandoned his teleprompter with off-the-cuff remarks. At one point, he complained about gaps in the bulletproof glass surrounding him and mused that an assassin would have to shoot through the news media to hit him.
And to get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. And I don't mind that so much, because I don't mind that.
Though Trump frequently bashes the media at his rallies and has tried to turn public opinion against them, a campaign spokesperson said the comment was not directed toward the media, but rather, quote, threats against them that were spurred on by dangerous rhetoric from Democrats. After a stop in North Carolina, Trump went on to a rally in Macon, Georgia, another of the 7 battleground states likely to decide the November 5th election. Trump called the United States a, quote, nation in decline, and warned without evidence of a second Great Depression with, quote, people jumping off buildings. Meanwhile, Harris on Sunday was in the swing state of Michigan. She first spoke to parishioners at a historically black church in Detroit before heading on to a rally in East Lansing, where she courted the state's 200,000 Arab Americans. Harris started her speech with a nod to civilian victims of Israel's wars in Gaza and Lebanon.
This year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza, and given the civilian casualties and displacement in Lebanon. It is devastating. And as president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza.
Reuters Ipsos polling shows that voters overall view both candidates unfavorably, but that does not appear to be dissuading them from casting ballots. Data from the University of Florida's election lab showed that more than 78 million Americans have already voted early. That's nearly half of the total votes that were cast in 2020, in which U.S. voter turnout was the highest in more than a century.
The polls are just as corrupt as some of the writers back there. They can make those polls sing. They can make them sing. They brag about it. I got a poll, I'm 10 points up in Iowa. One of my enemies just puts out a poll, I'm 3 down. They just announced a fake poll. Hey, think of it. Right before the election, that I'm 3 points down. I'm not down in Iowa. We got 2 days. We've been working for 9 years. We did a great job. We had the best economy ever. We had the wall. We had everything. I built over 500 miles of wall. They don't even talk about the wall. But we had the best border, the safest border. I won't pull down my world's favorite chart because I don't want to waste a lot of your time. But my world's favorite chart, done by the Border Patrol, it said we had the safest border in the history of our country the day that I left. I shouldn't have left. I mean, honestly, because we did so well. We had such a great. So now, I mean, every polling booth has hundreds of lawyers standing there. It's all about the lawyers. Everybody's standing lawyers.
So here we are on the Sunday before the election, and I would ask, in particular, people who have not yet voted, to not fall for his tactic, which I think includes suggesting to people that if they vote, their vote won't matter. Suggesting to people that somehow the integrity of our voting system is not intact so that they don't vote. And again, I think that it is a tactic. It is meant to distract from the fact that we have and support free and fair elections in our country. We did in 2020. He lost. And The systems that are in place for this election in 2024 have integrity. They are good systems, and the vote of the people will determine the outcome of this election, and everyone must know that their vote is their power to determine the outcome of the election, and their vote will count. It does matter.
She has violated her oath, eradicated our sovereign border, and unleashed an army of gangs and criminal migrants. I mean, we have migrants pouring in here by the tens of thousands that are criminals from jails, from mental institutions, terrorists. Everybody's working as a unit because winning this vote, and by the way, winning this state, we win this state and it's over. It's over. So get out there and do it. Kamala's hurricane response was a disgrace and actually a betrayal. So with your vote on Tuesday, we're going to fire Kamala and we are going to save America.
All right, let's go straight across to our guests to dissect this very closely watched US election. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Shelby Williams, a political strategist for the Republican Party. He joins us live from Texas in the US. Vivek Mishra, Deputy Director for Strategic Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation, is live with us from Washington, D.C. Professor Umu Salma Bawa, who teaches at the Center for European Studies at the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, is with us as well. And completing the panel tonight is Ambassador Jayan Das Gupta, former ambassador to the World Trade Organization. All right, we have a packed show and lots to unpack here. Let me begin with Shelby Williams. Mr. Williams, welcome to Global Lens. Good to have you on the show. Now, one new poll seems to suggest that Kamala Harris has taken the lead over Trump in Iowa, something that seems to have left Mr. Trump rather unhappy. But there is another poll called Atlas Intel, which suggests that Trump may have actually taken a lead in all the swing states. But fact of the matter is that most of the polls that we've seen in recent days and weeks seem to suggest this could go down in history as the closest US presidential election ever. However, here is the worry that is being expressed by many, not just Democrats, but by ordinary Americans and in fact people around the globe as they're closely watching this election. Donald Trump says he regrets having left the White House in 2020. Despite the fact that he lost that election. Now he says Democrats are fighting so hard to steal the damn thing and voting machines would be tampered with. What critics say is that Donald Trump is already laying the ground to question the integrity of this election as he did in 2020. He has decided that the election can be called free and fair only if he wins. But if he loses, then he will go to town saying this was a rigged election, it was a fraudulent election, and he will refuse to concede. Now that is a huge worry for Americans in general. They've seen chaos and political instability in the aftermath of 2020 election. They do not want to witness that all over again. Your thoughts?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. I wrote in before January 6th, 2021, January 4th, actually, that it doesn't matter how the vote by the joint section of Congress goes on January 6th, half the country is going to feel that the election was invalid. And we may be in a similar situation here. Now, regarding voting machines, there are some types of voting machines that are susceptible to tampering, but we have many different types of voting machines across America. Here in Texas, every county is responsible for selecting its own type of voting machine and responsible for its security. So we saw the clip of Kamala Harris a little bit ago saying that, because of the suggestion that the election can be rigged, don't vote. I say the exact opposite. I say make it too big to rig. If anybody thinks that the election might be stolen, make them work for it. Make it impossible to steal. Provide so many votes, turn out in such big numbers to vote that it just makes it impossible. And I think that's what we have to do anyway. In fact, a good example, I say this all the time, I watched India's elections earlier this year, and more people turned out to vote in India than even exist in the United States. And I want to see much greater voter turnout here. Now, in my home county of Collin in Texas, we have the highest voter turnout so far during early voting out of the top 10 largest cities in the state. So that's what we're trying to achieve here, and that's what we have to do.
I think one big difference between the US election and the Indian election is that while the ruling party and the opposition trade all sorts of charges in the heat of the election campaign, once the election is done and dusted, everyone graciously accepts the verdict of the people and moves on. Unfortunately, we did not see Trump do that in 2020, and the worry is if he is declared the loser, he will not concede defeat this time either. But let me ask you this. How confident is the Republican Party at this point in time that Donald Trump will be able to clinch enough electoral college votes to be able to defeat Kamala Harris? Because that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day, especially if it's going to be as tight an election as pollsters are predicting it to be.
We're very confident that President Trump will be reelected again. And part of the reason I say that is because in 2016, polls were all wrong for a variety of reasons. But take polls with a grain of salt. The enthusiasm we're seeing and some of the other measures, voter engagement, not just the number of votes cast or the polls, voter engagement, I think President Trump is going to win in a 2016-ish type electoral college victory. I think the balance is going to be like that. I do want to touch on one thing you said, that in 2020, the result of the election was not respected. That's been underway in America for a very long time. Back in the 2000 election, Bush versus Gore, the Democrat Party did not respect the results of that election either. That's really where the balance started to tip, and the challenges and the resulting animosity and chaos after every election really started to pick up, because we went through a couple of months there after the 2000 presidential election where nobody would give an inch, nobody would give in. And after George W. Bush was president, we had a lot of people on the Democrat side saying, not my president, and selected, not elected. And there was just a whole swath of people who refused to acknowledge George W. Bush as the legitimate president. That's an unfortunate tradition which is carried forward to today. I'd like to see that reversed.
Okay, I do not hold any brief for the Democratic Party. And of course, you're right that Al Gore had initially questioned the 2000 verdict, but it only took a few days for him to eventually concede defeat and congratulate George W. Bush. However, in this scenario, we are seeing it's been 4 long years and Donald Trump and his supporters continue to claim till date that the election was stolen from him. And may I remind you and my viewers that Donald Trump, as we speak, faces federal charges over trying to overturn the 2020 election. He went to multiple courts. His charges were thrown out. Okay, let me take this to Vivek Mishra. Vivek Mishra, isn't this perhaps the biggest concern vis-a-vis the American election today for Americans throughout that country and for all of us watching it in the rest of the world? That tomorrow, if Donald Trump is declared the loser, he is going to say, I always told you they were going to steal this election from me. There has been fraud. There has been rigging. I do not accept this verdict. I won. And we all saw how that panned out with the insurrection on the US Capitol on 6 January 2021. Many polls have suggested in recent days that Americans fear widespread chaos, violence and political instability in the aftermath of this election because of those very reasons. Is that something you would agree with?
So January 6th certainly has a legacy memory in most of the minds in the US and the world across. But I think here are a few things that sort of softens my concern personally. One is that the institutions in the US are much more prepared for a transition. As you saw over the past week, National Guard has been deployed in many states. So institutionally, I think we are at a better position. Plus the fact that you mentioned that Trump is undergoing some of the trials, which is just opening, which is likely to open just after the elections, also work as buffer to prevent any of the repeat of January 6th. But having said that, I mean, those are some of the softer paths that we have beneath the election apprehensions. But if it comes down to wire and there is a very narrow victory between the two candidates, and should Trump lose, then I think it could cut both ways in terms of what it means for his supporters. He might not give a call, but I think there is a genuine, as was outlined by Shelby, there's a genuine belief that Trump supporters, among the Trump supporters, that there is a grave and sort of feeling among the people that that they need a change. 76% of Americans today believe that the democracy is under threat. Now, that could cut both ways in terms of what could it, the Democrats have been saying that it's Trump who is responsible for that state. And the Republican Party has been saying that the last 4 years is actually responsible. And particularly they highlight the state of economy and immigration at the helm. So I think that sentiment, if it were to be turned into something more violent and threatening, then we could see some of the repeat of January 6th. But I think, as I said, institutionally, I think we are much more prepared. This country is much more prepared in terms of how it could deal with a potential solution. And I think it was interesting what House Speaker Mike Johnson said the other day when he was confronted with this question about whether he will accept the verdict if Trump loses. And that question came because Trump actually in one of his rallies said that he and I have a little secret, quote unquote. So that really fueled the speculation that the House Speaker may not accept the verdict. But when he was confronted, he said, we will accept the law. We will, the United States Constitution rules above everybody else. So I think broadly, we've seen that, but on Trump's rhetoric side, we've seen some insinuations that he might not be in a position to accept, particularly if he loses by a small margin.
I'd say those are more than insinuations. Those do sound like pretty direct threats. Correct me if I'm wrong, but on the 6th of January, the certification of the Electoral College votes and declaration of the winner is something that is done by the Vice President. And in this case, it happens to be one of the two candidates, Kamala Harris. Okay, let me take this to Professor Bawa now. Professor Bawa, you know, when Donald Trump says, I should not have left the White House after 2020, when he says the Democrats are fighting so hard to steal this election, when he says voting machines are going to be tampered with, and let me also inform our viewers that the Republicans have already filed more than 100 lawsuits in the battleground states preemptively. This does give us a fair idea, doesn't it, Professor Bawa, of where things might be headed if Donald Trump is not declared the winner and if the victory margin, hypothetically, for Kamala Harris is not a very wide one. Do you not believe this is a big enough reason for Americans to truly worry about where their democracy is headed? In fact, many have said recently in the United States that there's so much nervousness amongst American voters. They believe the stakes have never been higher before, and that regardless of the outcome of the election, they believe that permanent or irreparable damage is going to be caused to American democracy. That's the kind of level of anxiety that exists among American voters today.
So I think with just a day away from election day, you can just see that how much perception is ruling the reality, and it depends on who is bringing what kind of polls and opinion polls and surveys out, and what is being put across. But I think more importantly, 4 years ago, an election took place, and President Trump at that point in time did not accept the verdict. It tells a lot about the kind of trust, or should I say mistrust, that is placed on institutions within American democracy. And the fact that leading up to election day, he once again, starts putting out these words that the election was stolen 4 years back, and it would and it could happen again, and therefore there has to be a preemptive measure of taking lawsuits put into place, already tells you the kind of narrative that is already being put out in the public domain. This is not in private. This is happening in public, in the rallies where it is addressing. It's down to the line now. It's the last few hours as the people, those who have not yet voted, come out to vote. A very small bandwidth of undecided voters, but clearly there's an attempt to spin the perception as if the election would be stolen. You would be really confounded to think for a minute, if we remove the word the US, to wonder in which countries' elections are we talking about, where there is going to be a contestation after election day. And that is surprising for a country which has always been ready to point out about how elections are conducted in other countries, that here is a leading candidate who is willing to challenge, what will be the outcome, and also kind of indicate to the supporters that if it doesn't go in their way, then that should be challenged. I think that is something fundamentally, which begs the question to ask that if you put out such a conditionality prior to the results coming out as the elections will take place, then are you not questioning the entire democratic framework and every institution that has been, created and put out in America? And this will come down to a lot about what these two candidates will stand for in the end. I think that is going to be extremely important. Is this about America, or is it about an individual, or is it about Americans? I think that is going to be a very important point as we come down to the last few hours.
American institutions that today Donald Trump is sowing doubts about, whose credibility and integrity he's questioning. Remember, these are the very institutions that handed him that, absolutely unbelievable win in 2016. It is the same country, the same institutions, the same system that he is today attacking. All right, I need to take a quick break here on Global Lens. On the other side, I will go across to Ambassador Jayandas Gupta to understand his take on what's going on in the United States with just about 24 hours to go for Election Day.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
Cooking is an act of love. The first act of love we receive from our mothers in the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
Representation it's also important, no? I want to wear this white coat every day and then be a chef.
There are stories. If the name of whiskey is Imri, then there is a whole story behind that.
Cooking food is like a therapy, and eating one is like a pleasure I can give it to myself. With Lounge Nights, I'm on a journey to celebrate and recognize the best food and nightlife establishments in various cities across India.
Radico presents Lounge Nights every Saturday and Sunday only on News9 Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the US presidential election that's now just 24 hours away. Ambassador Jan Das Gupta, let me come to you now, sir, and thank you for waiting patiently. Now, if you were an American and you heard Donald Trump say they are trying to steal the election, voting machines would be tampered with, regardless of who you supported, would you not be worried about what this election might do to American democracy itself, and the fact that this kind of rhetoric is very possibly laying the ground for huge political and social instability and also very likely instances of violence?
This question brings up two very important aspects. One is that if I am not an American citizen, and if I am not a very committed Republican or Democratic voter, but I am kind of in the middle, and I could switch my votes depending on whom I am impressed with more, then I would surely be very, very concerned, because the whole institution of democracy is being challenged in a sense which I think Professor Bauer has also brought out so eloquently. So it would be a cause for worry that the democratic institutions are getting undermined very seriously by one candidate. The second point is that in the backdrop of what happened on the 6th of January 2021, when President Trump now says, and in the closing stages of the campaign, that the Democrats are, trying their level best to steal this election from him, and the fact that more than 100 petitions have already been filed preemptively on behalf of the Republicans, the stage, I feel, somehow is being set that if Trump loses, possibly it will be by a narrow margin. Whosoever wins will win by a narrow margin, despite what the polls are predicting. In that case, there would be a call to not accept this mandate, and Trump could possibly try to whip up a frenzy amongst his supporters, especially the fringe elements, to attack democratic institutions. And, it could possibly lead to violence against the police, for instance, who would be called in, and the National Guards who would be called in to maintain law and order. So that is a scenario which has already happened on a smaller scale on the 6th of January 2021, but it could we could see it happening across many US cities. So that is one scenario. The second scenario is that if he wins, again by a very small margin, he would say, the Democrats tried their level best to steal this election from me, like they did so successfully in 2020, but I have thwarted their attempts and I have won. And thanks very much to all of you who have supported me, stood by me through all this. So either way, I think he's planning a kind of a post-poll roadmap for himself, that whether he loses or wins, he goes down in a blaze of glory in any case. So this is my reading of the situation.
Back to Shelby Williams at this point. Mr. Williams, you've heard the concerns of the other panelists. So as you can see, this is a concern not just across America, this is a concern across the globe, because US elections matter to the entire world. None of us are going to remain insulated from its outcome. So let me ask you this question. Is it fair or reasonable for any candidate in an election to say that if I win, it was a free and fair election, and if I lose, it was a rigged, fraudulent election? Also, can the Republican Party, on behalf of President Trump, give an assurance to the people of the United States that whatever the outcome of the Tuesday election, there will not be another January 6th?
Well, let's be very clear about what happened and did not happen on January 6th. So the crowds gathered in Washington, D.C. At the Capitol that day were there for the certification vote, a joint session of Congress to certify the results of the Electoral College. And what President Trump said was, now we are going to walk over to the Capitol and peacefully and patriotically make our voices heard. Now, his video was immediately cut from social media, and his profiles were wiped out, and you couldn't view that clip unless you really dug for it. And there was actually no attempt. It's called an insurrection. There was no attempt to actually overthrow the government that day, let alone by President Trump. President Trump himself released a video after people started going inside the Capitol and started causing havoc, saying, you have to go home. We have to have peace. So fast forward to right now. And actually, I did write in 2020 that the real election fraud was the media, because for 4 long years of Trump's presidency, and especially in 2020 in the build up to the election, American media was continuously promulgating the idea that Trump was a fascist, Trump was a racist, Trump was going to destroy our democracy. We've heard that constantly. And when he was president, none of it happened. I think it's also important to point out that in America, we very deliberately do not have a democracy. We have a constitutional republic. That's part of the reason we have an electoral college, because we are a republic. Now, today, it's entirely possible that the election could be rigged. Whether or not that has anything to do with voting machines, the American media has been at it again, trying to foster the idea that if Trump is elected, he's going to destroy our democracy. He's the greatest threat to the world. And not recognizing that people who were alive and voted 8 years ago were told all the same things, that if Trump were elected president in 2016, that would be the end of the country. He was going to establish a dictatorship. None of it happened, and yet they're saying the same things now. I want to ask the opposite question. What if Trump wins? And what if it is narrow? What if he wins by a few electoral college votes? Is the Democrat Party, is the American media going to say it was a fair election? Are they going to say, oh, yep, Trump won, that's fair, let's recognize Trump as president? They didn't in 2016. And the only reason that it was over so quickly as in 2016 is because everybody was caught by surprise. No, including the pollsters, nobody thought Trump was going to win. And then he did, and he won with a pretty significant electoral college victory. So if Trump wins by 6 electoral college votes right now, is the Democrat Party going to say, all right, that's fair, we had a free and fair election, let's move on, Trump is president? I don't think so.
Okay. Of course, we don't know how the Democratic Party is going to react if it is a wafer-thin majority and a win for Donald Trump at the end of the day. But, you know, of course, it's not for me to say whether Trump has dictatorial tendencies or not. But those allegations essentially stem from some of the statements that he's made quite publicly. When you talk about unleashing the military and the National Guard on fellow Americans, calling them the enemy within, referring to the Democrats, referring to the opposition, referring to your critics, well, then that is when parallels with dictators are drawn. And also, talking about 6th January, you say, well, he just asked his supporters to march peacefully to the US Capitol. Fact of the matter is that for hours, many in his own party pleaded with President Trump to intervene once the rampage at the US Capitol began. He chose not to. He chose to remain silent. And that happened on his watch as the President of the United States of America, who many believe did incite that mob that went on a rampage. But Vivek Mishra, let me come to you now. Of course, Shelby Williams says, the Democrats, after all, cried foul when it was George W. Bush versus Al Gore in 2000. How do we know that they will gracefully accept the verdict of the people if it's a win for Donald Trump? I guess we'll just have to wait to find out. But how do you think the election is likely to pan out really in the swing states? Because that's where really the entire focus is. Today is the last day of campaigning and both candidates are focusing primarily on the swing states. The big prize, of course, being Pennsylvania.
Yeah, swing states have been critical for quite some time, and to my mind, I think one thing that personally I think will be critical is how much of support among men, which is shifting towards Trump, can Trump retain in the swing states, and how much of the support of women, which is shifting towards Harris, can she retain in the swing states? I think that, to my mind, will be really critical when we look at the swing states. Pennsylvania, as you know, is really tied between, and Harris had a lead there. Trump has caught on. But remember that the Republicans have a trend of catching up in the Electoral College. So if Trump is tied, it's not looking good for the Democrats in some swing states. But Harris is ahead in 3, at least that I know of. So I think swing states will be critical, and then of course Iowa has come in. I don't know what that means because Trump has decried that such last-minute polls are instigated against him. But in the swing states, as I see it right now, Pennsylvania will be very critical. Arizona, North Carolina, the Rust Belt will be critical, and there for Trump, I think the support is huge. North Carolina again is very crucial, but within the 3 blue wall is going to be the decisive, the Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. I think if Trump breaks the blue wall, the likelihood of it is really more than or close to 50%. If he really breaks the blue wall, and in particular Pennsylvania, I think it's going to be very challenging for the Democrats to retain the support. But one last point on how does it also pan out in the US Congress. I think around 30 odd seats for Senate is also up for grab. And that's an interesting thing to watch out, because even if the Democrats go on to win and lose the Senate, the possibility of it is being talked about that Republicans will be able to flip the Senate. Then I think passing any legislation will be so challenging for the next Harris administration. So I think we should also be mindful of how the US Congress is shaping up. For example, particularly on questions of Ukraine, whoever comes, if Harris comes in, there will be a political will to support Ukraine by doubling down perhaps. But will she have the consensus in the US Congress to do that is the question to my mind.
You're right. What the composition of Congress is like at the end of this election will be very significant and will determine to a large extent the functioning of the incoming administration. Professor Bawa, let me come to you now. We're talking about how it all boils down to the swing states. I also want to look at certain specific demographics. Now, most seem to believe that vis-a-vis women, Kamala Harris has a distinct advantage over Trump because, abortion rights, health and reproductive rights have become a huge issue in the US. That is where Trump certainly has a disadvantage. But to the surprise of many, some polls recently suggested that there has been a shift in the Hispanic male vote and the black male vote towards Trump. These are demographics that you would normally think would vote Democrat. But that does not really seem to be the case. And as Bill Clinton once famously said, it's the economy stupid. And it's a great paradox today for the United States that while economists will tell you that the United States economy is doing spectacularly well, that is not how a vast majority of Americans actually feel, especially given the high cost of living. Is that the factor that is driving a lot of these demographics towards Trump?
So I think that's a very critical point that you've raised about the swing states. The demographics is extremely important to look at, what I would call as who is standing for the hard and the soft issues. It has been projected in the conversations and, in popular media as well, and especially those who have been supporting the Republicans, that, Trump would mean an economic recovery. It's the America First slogan all over again. He will bring the jobs back. And that kind of, you can immediately see resonating with, a certain section of male voters, especially in the swing states. On the other hand, I think the historic setback on abortion rights in America, the overturning of the abortion rights, is extremely critical for the 50% of American population, irrespective of the swing states. I think it touches at the core of American lives, the fact that women, do not have certain rights, and a certain conversation which also has been sparked about in the last few days, which talks about taking away voting rights of women. I mean, are we talking about the United States of America, voting rights which were given to women in 1920, the 19th Amendment? I mean, these are very critical things, which also is showing to us a certain kind of a gender divide, which is also taking place among the demographics. So I think you'll have to look at it in a much larger context. Where have historically certain population voted, whether it's the blacks or the Hispanics, what has happened in terms of a personal setback if job relocations have taken place. And how do women who have been the early voters, large turnout has meant more women have also come out to vote, because there is a greater fear that a return of a Trump administration would mean further cutback in benefits and facilities for women. And that is something, which is really staring down on the face. It's a reality. It is part of what Trump did when he packed the Supreme Court, with his judges. So for a progressive country, the country which touts to be the leader of the world, internally, I think there is a contestation of a kind you've hardly seen. The polarization has meant that it is also going to produce an election day result where, the margins are going to be less, which will allow the perception of the narrative to play out. It's also pushing at the last minute, male voters, where Trump would try to see if he can get a little bit more edge over there to kind of close the deal and say that if I'm the one who's going to put money back in your pockets, get the jobs in, strengthen the economy by, cutting, increasing tariffs, and we will make in America. These are very simple slogans which people can believe. What the reality in terms of what the economy will produce, is going to be something extremely different. And so that's where you're seeing where some of these, latest surveys and opinions and the attempt to counter any kind of advantage that one side sees is being given to the others. So the Republicans countering what they believe, the Democrats have taken a lead, and the Democrats then, pinning back and saying that we are arguing for all of America, not for a particular section of America, which is what the Republicans are trying to do. So it's all about the political messaging in the last minute.
Okay, you talked about abortion rights. Not only does Donald Trump boast about and take credit for the US Supreme Court overturning the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling, he just recently said, I'm going to protect the American women, whether the women like it or not. But Ambassador Jayan Dasgupta, as we wrap up this discussion, I want to ask you this question. Will the women vote be enough to see Kamala Harris through? Yes, she has a distinct advantage over Trump on the issue of women's rights, abortion rights, but, there are many, especially the fence-sitters, who say we still don't know enough about Kamala Harris. We know that she came into the race rather late in the day. And then there are many in the black community, who say, especially men, who feel that an economic recovery would be better under Trump. Despite Trump's repeated and consistent anti-immigrant rhetoric, fact of the matter is that many Hispanic men are likely to vote for Trump, again, because they probably believe it will mean more jobs and greater economic prosperity. And then let's not forget that there are many amongst the Arab Americans who are very unhappy with the Biden-Harris administration over their support to Israel in the Gaza war. So given all those factors, would you say that Kamala Harris does face a lot of challenges? And on the issue of the black community, there are also many who wonder if she's black enough for them to vote for her.
I think the distinct advantage that Kamala Harris enjoys in respect of more women supporting her rather than Trump, that will be a positive factor in her favor. But as you mentioned, the blacks, some of them, and mind you, if you look at the average incomes or the levels of unemployment, the blacks and Latinos are disproportionately hit by both these factors rather than the white community. So they would like a revival of the economy, more jobs to be created, and this kind of promise which Trump has been holding out, that he will make America great again by bringing back, for one thing, industries and jobs to the American shores, that could appeal to a certain section of even the black and the Latinos. The third thing is that the people who are already in, and the blacks may have been there, for generations. They may not be recent immigrants also, and their citizenship is not under a cloud or under question. So they would not feel threatened by Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric, because what he is saying basically is that many of the immigrants have come in illegally and they have a criminal history in their own homelands and they should be deported back. So the Latinos who are already there and the blacks who are already there, I think, of course, they would feel threatened, but not to the same extent as illegal immigrants. The other point I wanted to mention is that when people from sharing the race with Trump, they make fun of the Latinos by saying they are make love babies, and the Puerto Rico is floating in garbage.
Yes.
So that is a kind of a personal attack, whether you are a recent immigrant or an immigrant for 20, 30 years with all your citizenship papers in place.
Yes.
That would hit their sentiments, their emotions, and they would vote against Trump, to my mind.
Okay.
So all these factors, I think, would come to play. And finally, the issue is also about women, especially from the underprivileged backgrounds.
Yeah.
Finding the time, because they would be probably, looking after their children.
So the voter turnout, how many of them will actually step out of their homes and cast their ballots, even if they do support Kamala Harris? Voter turnout is important. 75 million people have already voted across America, but remember, election day is 24 hours away, and both parties will need to get their supporters out of their homes and cast their ballots. That is going to be a significant factor as well. I'm completely out of time, but this is, of course, a story that we'll track very closely here on Global Lens. On that note, Shelby Williams, Vivek Mishra, Professor Bava and Ambassador Das Gupta, thank you to all of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. We look forward to having all of you back on the show.
Indian Americans are redefining success in every field. However, Indian Americans haven't historically been a political force in US elections. But the 2024 race could mark a turning point for one of the fastest growing immigrant groups in the country. Ever since Kamala Harris, the daughter of an Indian mother, unexpectedly rose to become the 2024 Democratic nominee, Indian American communities say they've seen a groundswell of support and energy for this election. Elections are won on the margin, and Indian Americans can be that margin of victory. This is the Indian American vote.
Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Here are the top headlines today. The Indian mission in Ottawa has expressed disappointment